Go on to Alma chapter 53.
And it came to pass that they did set guards over the prisoners of the Lamanites, and did compel them to go forth and bury their dead, yea, and also the dead of the Nephites who were slain. And Moroni placed men over them to guard them while they should perform their labors. And Moroni went to the city of Mulek with Lehi, and took command of the city, and gave it unto Lehi. Now behold, this Lehi was a man who had been with Moroni in the more part of all his battles, and he was a man like unto Moroni, and they rejoiced in each other's safety. Yea, they were beloved by each other, and also beloved by all the people of Nephi. And it came to pass that after the Lamanites had finished burying their dead, and also the dead of the Nephites, they were marched back into the land Bountiful, and Teancum, by the orders of Moroni, caused that they should commence laboring in digging a ditch around about the land, or the city Bountiful.
This picks up right where the other ended, right? In the previous chapter, this is they had all this large number of prisoners that they had taken, right? So now at the beginning of this chapter, it says that they put guards over the prisoners, and they gave them a job to do, to bury the dead, right? From both sides, right? They said, hey, a lot of dead here, and so let's give you something to do, keep you occupied. So they went ahead and told them to bury all the dead, and so the Nephites just guarded them while they did this particular work. And that now it says that they reclaimed the city of Mulek, as we said, right? And it says they took command of the city, gave it to Lehi. It mentions that Lehi was a great leader also, right? Beloved of the people. And so once they had finished burying all the dead, it says that now they told them to commence digging a ditch around the land or the city Bountiful. They had success in protecting some of the other cities by digging a ditch and then maybe building some kind of a wall or fort around the city. So they said, let's get started on this. And what better labor to make use of than the labor of our prisoners here, right? We don't even have to use our own people to do this. We'll just have them do the work, and they can help us to protect our city here.
And he caused that they should build a breastwork of timbers upon the inner bank of the ditch, and they cast up dirt out of the ditch against the breastwork of timbers, and thus they did cause the Lamanites to labor until they had encircled the city of Bountiful round about with a strong wall of timbers and earth to an exceeding height. And this city became an exceeding stronghold ever after. And in this city they did guard the prisoners of the Lamanites, yea, even within a wall which they had caused them to build with their own hands. Now Moroni was compelled to cause the Lamanites to labor, because it was easy to guard them while at their labor. And he desired all his forces when he should make an attack upon the Lamanites. And it came to pass that Moroni had thus gained a victory over one of the greatest of the armies of the Lamanites, and had obtained possession of the city of Mulek, which was one of the strongest holds of the Lamanites in the land of Nephi. And thus he had also built a stronghold to retain his prisoners.
Right, so in 4, it's describing the rest of the work that they did, right? So in 3 they were digging the ditches, and then in 4 now they're putting up the timbers and building the wall, right? So it says until upon when they were done, so they had encased the city of Bountiful round about with a strong wall of timbers and earth to an exceeding height, right? So now they had a nice protected city here that this was kind of becoming their stronghold here, the city of Bountiful up on the north end. So they've now protected the city, and now they have a place to put the prisoners, right? And so in fact, it even comments how it says now they have a nice wall that they could put the prisoners in, and the prisoners built it themselves, right? So they get to build their own prison here, as it says, even with a wall which they had caused them to build with their own hands, right? And it even comments how by making them have to work all the time, it made it easier to guard them too, right? It says, hey, when they're busy, right, they can't be busy trying to fight us because they're busy doing their work, and plus they're worn out by the end of the day, so then they don't have too much energy to get into too much trouble and try to fight their way out. So let's keep them busy and keep them working, and then they're even easier to guard. They don't have to worry about them trying to have an uprising or anything, right? So upon doing all this, and then just comments in 6 how that that this was a great victory for them, right? They were able to get a lot of the Lamanites as prisoners. They were able to get the city of Mulek back, and they even got to build up the city of Bountiful and have it well protected, right? So that this was a nice victory for them. So this is still really the outcome from chapter 52. That it's just this was kind of the spoils of their victory from chapter 52.
And it came to pass that he did no more attempt to battle with the Lamanites in that year, but he did employ his men in preparing for war, yea, and in making fortifications to guard against the Lamanites, yea, and also delivering their women and their children from famine and affliction, and providing food for their armies. And now it came to pass that the armies of the Lamanites on the west sea, south, while in the absence of Moroni, on account of some intrigue amongst the Nephites, which caused dissensions amongst them, had gained some ground over the Nephites, yea, insomuch that they had obtained possession of a number of their cities in that part of the land. And thus because of iniquity amongst themselves, yea, because of dissensions and intrigue among themselves, they were placed in the most dangerous circumstances.
See, I would almost wonder why the chapters broke the way they did here, right? Because actually the first 6 verses that we just read kind of is almost the end of the previous chapter, right? It was, they won the battle, here's the prisoners, now here's what they did with the prisoners. Right, now 7 is kind of, it just changes over a little bit, right? So now it says there were no more battles for the rest of that year, all right? But now it says they had what it calls some intrigue among the Nephites. In other words, there was some things going on that Moroni had to pay attention to, and therefore, we mentioned this one of the other weeks, right? When you're having things going on amongst yourselves, then you can't focus on the real enemy, right? Because you get your own little offenses or disagreements or whatever. Right? I guess it was when we talked about the kingmen and the freemen, right? Remember a few chapters ago. So when you get your own infighting going on, then you can't focus on who the real enemy is. So as it says here in 8 and 9, all this was going on, that the Lamanites were back, maybe taking little cities here and there. And so by the end of 9, it says that they were placed in the most dangerous circumstances, okay? So that they were now back under attack, but they're certainly in a precarious situation now, because the Lamanites are trying to take hold of some of the different cities again.
And now behold, I have somewhat to say concerning the people of Ammon, who in the beginning were Lamanites, but by Ammon and his brethren, or rather by the power and word of God, they had been converted unto the Lord, and they had been brought down into the land of Zarahemla, and had ever since been protected by the Nephites. And because of their oath, they had been kept from taking up arms against their brethren, for they had taken an oath that they never would shed blood more, and according to their oath they would have perished. Yea, they would have suffered themselves to have fallen into the hands of their brethren, had it not been for the pity and the exceeding love which Ammon and his brethren had had for them. And for this cause they were brought down into the land of Zarahemla, and they ever had been protected by the Nephites.
Whereas in 8 and 9 it was saying that now the Nephites are in some dangerous circumstances. Now it's leading up to something. It's saying, well, let me talk about the people of Ammon for a minute. Right? Remember the people of Ammon? Right? They went by some other names back then. Anybody remember the first name that they went by? Anti-Nephi Lehi. That they were the Lamanites who were converted at the time of Ammon, right? And that they were so convicted of having been murderous people that they made an oath before God that they would never again use weapons to kill people. In fact, they dug a ditch and they buried their weapons in the ground, right? Because as a kind of a show of what they were going to do. And they said that we would rather we be killed than to take up arms again. So once they did that, then they came over to the land of Zarahemla. In fact, they were given their own little land, right? In the land of Jershon, right? That was the part of the land that was given to them, right? That they might have their own place to live. And they put it in such a place where the Nephites could protect them there, right? Because they wouldn't be part of the army, obviously, because they couldn't fight or kill people. So they were just taken care of. And they contributed money to help pay the expenses of the army, but they couldn't participate as actual fighters because they had taken the oath to not take up arms, right? So it's just mentioned them. It says, remember the people of Ammon who wouldn't take up arms? Or we're going to say a few things about them now. Okay, so that's why it says 12, that they were brought down to Zarahemla. They had ever been protected by the Nephites.
But it came to pass that when they saw the danger and the many afflictions and tribulations which the Nephites bore for them, they were moved with compassion, and were desirous to take up arms in the defense of their country. But behold, as they were about to take their weapons of war, they were overpowered by the persuasions of Helaman and his brethren, for they were about to break the oath which they had made. And Helaman feared, lest by so doing they should lose their souls. Therefore all those who had entered into this covenant were compelled to behold their brethren wade through their afflictions in their dangerous circumstances at this time.
They see their brethren and they're all fighting and some being killed and so forth, and now they're feeling kind of helpless at this point. They say, we have to just sit by and watch and watch all this bad stuff happen and watch them be killed, and we can't do anything. So it's, you know what? How about we'll fight with you, all right? We'll head and we'll get and take weapons and we'll join the army and we want to fight with you also, right? But see, now here's where the difference between godly people being involved, all right? Now, maybe in some other nation or some other army that would say, great, we've been waiting for you to fight with us, all right? But that's not what happened, all right? It says, you can see, it says that Helaman and the brethren talked to them and said, no, that would be a bad thing, right? Because you made the promise to me, you made the promise to God that you weren't going to fight again. So it said Helaman feared that by so doing they would lose their souls, all right, by doing that. So therefore they said, no, you really can't do that. We believe in God. We believe that a promise to God is important. So we don't want you to fight, right? Because you promised to God that you wouldn't. So that's why it says in 15, it says those men were compelled to just watch their brethren do this, but they couldn't fight because Helaman said, no, we don't want you to fight because you promised God that you wouldn't. Okay, so they were told, no, we appreciate your wanting to help, but that's not the right answer right now.
But behold, it came to pass they had many sons, who had not entered into a covenant, that they would not take their weapons of war to defend themselves against their enemies. Therefore they did assemble themselves together at this time, as many as were able to take up arms, and they called themselves Nephites. And they entered into a covenant to fight for the liberty of the Nephites, yea, to protect the land unto the laying down of their lives. Yea, even they covenanted that they never would give up their liberty, but they would fight in all cases to protect the Nephites and themselves from bondage. Now behold, there were 2,000 of those young men who entered into this covenant and took their weapons of war to defend their country. And now behold, as they never had hitherto been a disadvantage to the Nephites, they became now at this period of time also a great support, for they took their weapons of war, and they would that Helaman should be their leader.
Upon the people of Ammon saying, well, gee, we really wish we could fight with you, or fight along with you, and they'd be part of the army, but they said, well, no, we don't want you to lose your soul. It says they had many sons who, some time has passed now, see, so whereas at the time that the promise was made, I think all the adults made that promise, but it didn't necessarily include children, or maybe even children weren't even born yet. So now some time has passed, now they have sons who are old enough to be in the army, and they didn't make any promise, right? So it says, behold, they have many sons who had not entered into the covenant, so they can participate, they can be part of this, they can be part of the army. So they did, right? They said, yeah, we want to do this. And so as you can see that they're going to join in and be part of the Nephite army and protect the liberty and so forth, right? And now in 18 it says that there were 2,000 of them, and 2,000 such young men, and that they became their own little army, right, of 2,000 young men. And in fact, there's going to be several references made to this army of 2,000 young men. And so in 19 it says that Helaman was going to be their leader. So that this is forming their own little part of the army. These 2,000 young men who volunteered to step up and be part of the army because their fathers had made the promise not to, but they were going to do it on behalf of the whole people of Ammon. So they were going to represent them in the army here. And now notice in 19 it says, whereas it says they had never been exactly a disadvantage, but they weren't really an advantage either over the years, the people of Ammon, because they couldn't fight. But now it says they were going to become a great support and be part of this because their sons were able to participate and be part of this effort.
And they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage, and also for strength and activity. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times, in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God, and to walk uprightly before him. And now it came to pass that Helaman did march at the head of his 2,000 stripling soldiers to the support of the people in the borders of the land on the south by the West Sea. And thus ended the 28th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi.
Okay, so you can see that in 22 they're referred to as the 2,000 stripling soldiers, all right? And that's the term that's going to be used, all right? Over the next really several chapters, you'll see mention of Helaman's 2,000 stripling soldiers, all right? And so really it's a very famous entity in the Book of Mormon, all right? That's one of the favorite stories that's told of the 2,000 stripling warriors, all right, led by Helaman. So then that's what they were. They were the sons of the people of Ammon, or the sons of the anti-Nephite Lehi's, and the ones who stepped up and said, well, our fathers promised not to fight, but we're going to represent them because the promise didn't cover us. We didn't make that promise, so we're going to go ahead and fight and be part of this. And you see in 20 and 21 some of the good things that are said about them. They're valiant and courage and strength and keeping the commandments of God, right? And so in 21 where it says they were taught to keep the commandments of God and walk uprightly before Him, I mean, I'm not surprised because their parents, are the ones that made this promise before God that they wouldn't pick up a weapon even if it meant that they would get killed, right? So that really required a lot of faith on their part, and so I'm not surprised that they would have taught their children to follow the commandments of God, right? So these young men were raised in those kind of homes, and so they were godly men, but they had also honorable men because they said, well, we need to help defend our country, and so we can represent even our fathers in this particular type of army. Okay, so you'll be hearing more about the 2000 stripling warriors and some of the other chapters that we're going to be reading.